The January patch, or the 1.3 patch, was just announced and is live on the PTR at the moment. And it includes expedition mutations, which are incredibly exciting. But if you're anything like me, you're a little bit confused when you first read the patch notes, trying to figure out exactly how they work. Well, this video is a full guide about how to get into, how to complete, and what the rewards are from the dungeon mutation. In the background, there will be the footage from the dungeon that I did, which is Dynasty Mutation Level 1. And you should hopefully be able to see some of the mechanics coming into play there. Let's start from the very beginning. If we haven't met before, I'm ActusXD, you're lovely, let's get stuck straight into it. So the first thing to know is how to get into these mutated dungeons. Well, you need what's called a mutated tuning orb, and there are two ways to get these. The first, much like the regular dungeon tuning orbs, is to craft them at the stone cutting table. You can craft one a week, they have a cooldown of 7 days, and they seem like they're going to be pretty damn expensive. The mats are listed on screen here, but they are not cheap. The second way to get them, and it seems like there's not going to be any cooldown for this, is to buy them from the faction vendor, and it costs a chunk of gold, as well as 10,000 faction tokens. So that's not that cheap either, although it does seem to me like 10k faction tokens is probably going to be quicker or easier to get than doing that one reset every week. You're still going to have to use an Asmo chisel, which costs 7,000, so you're having to spend a fair amount of gold plus 7,000 tokens on an Asmo chisel. Once you have your mutated dungeon tuning orb, you go to whatever expedition is mutated for that week. Expeditions will get mutated for a period of 7 days, and they will cycle through. At the moment, it looks like the 3 expeditions that are going to be mutated will be Garden of Genesis, the Lazarus Instrumentality, and Dynasty Shipyard. Go to the entrance of the expedition, and the menu there will explain to you, or will show the mutated expedition menu. Presently in the Void mutation, we have the following changes to mobs. The first one is creeping, so when mobs die, they cast a spell that grants others Void Empower, which means that they do more damage. They have Oblivion 1, which means that they apply a leech on hit, and that deals Void damage to the person that they hit, as well as heals them over time. They have Void Resist, or they take less damage from Void damage. A percentage of all the damage that they deal is dealt as Void damage, and they apply a building thing called Paranoia when they're hit. And at 4 stacks that deals void damage, and it seems to be in an AoE area. You can see in this clip here that this is the mutated tier 1. As you go up the mutation tiers, the Oblivion, Void Resist, and Paranoid all go up from tier 1, let's say perks, to tier 2, which means that they're more powerful in addition to having Empower and Curses. To be able to zone in to the first mutated level, you need what's called the level 1 codex for that expedition, and you get that from doing the regular expedition. So for instance, on the PTR at the moment, the first mutated expedition is the Dynasty Shipyards. We had to do a regular run of Dynasty Shipyards to get codex level 1, to get into mutation 1. I don't know whether in live, if you've already done the expedition, in 1.1, 1.2 or earlier, whether you will get that Codex 1, or whether you'll have to do a regular one when 1.3 goes live. To do level 1, you only have the mutations that we've already spoken about, and there's 3 items that can be unlocked, including the weapon shards for Void and armor shards for Void, like I spoke about, and a amulet, as well as the original 5 things that could drop from Dynasty, but upgraded to be 500 gear score, not whatever they were before that. And the maximum amount of umbral shards you can get if you do everything perfectly, go get all the multipliers, get a great score, is 40. If you get a silver score, if you score silver, which I think is 20,000 points as I said, then you will unlock the next difficulty, and it seems like for the first 2 they're exactly the same. I don't know whether they get any more difficult in terms of how hard the mobs hit or anything, but the mutations and everything else stays the same. And when you go to 3, then it gets promoted, so now that Oblivion, Void Resist, and Paranoid are all tier 2 perks on the enemy mobs, which means they are obviously going to be more harmful, and then some mobs have been promoted. So enemies heal a greater percentage of their damage done from Vampiric, which is the Oblivion perk that comes out there. as well as they cast Phalanx, which is a shield that blocks player projectiles, which I imagine you'll have to run around the other side of or break through, I'm not sure. Tier 3 and Tier 4 are the same, but Vampiric goes to Tier 2, and then from Tier 6 to Tier 8, we add Curse, which is a blowback void, where when players use an ability, that's players, not enemies this time, it depletes a global affliction, so it'll be across everybody, not just player specific, it'll be your whole party. When that bar is depleted, then on every party member is going to be a zone that silences them, and after a short period of time it will explode, dealing void damage. So you'll need to make sure that when you run the bar out, everyone moves out of those locations to avoid taking the damage. Tier 7 and 8 are the same, however I imagine that things get more difficult in terms of how hard the bosses are hitting, and I'm not sure if it's how effective these abilities are, it doesn't specifically say. And then from Tier 9 and 10, they don't add any more mutation types. However, there is a second player curse called Truncated. When the silent zones are active, whether you're in them or not, everyone loses their natural mana regeneration, and you get a large amount, it says, I won't say a huge amount, you get a large amount more by standing in a silent zone. What are they called? A silent zone. So I guess the thing will be you're not going to regenerate mana if you're outside the silent zones during that time, but if you go into them, you won't be able to cast spells, but you get a heap of mana back. So it's going to be this balancing game about trying to have enough mana to be doing damage outside the silent zones and then going back in, stocking your mana up, and then coming back out. I imagine that these difficulties are going to be ridiculously hard, like very small percentage of the player base, I think, will be able to complete them. As I said before, the dungeons cycle each week. At the moment on the PTR, Dynasty Shipyards, and the mutation is the Void mutation. So presumably, next time it comes back around to Dynasty, it'll be that expedition with the Fire mutation. They're currently the two elements that are in the rotation in the patch notes, is Fire and Void. In the patch notes, the new perks for both weapon and armor also mention Ice and Nature buffs on weapons and protection on armor. So presumably they will be the next two elements that are being added to the game. When you enter a mutated dungeon, it uses one mutated tuning orb. It doesn't also use a dungeon tuning orb. Mutations change every mob in the expedition. All the trash, all the named mini bosses, and all the actual bosses all have extra abilities depending on what tier you're at. If you forget what the mutations do in the expedition at any time, if you press M, there's a little icon on the right hand side of your map. You can hover over that and it'll tell you exactly what mutations are doing or how they're affecting the mobs in your expedition at any time. You just have a read of that. So presently in the first one is Creeping. So when mobs die, they cast a spell that grants others Void Empower, which means that they do more damage. They have Oblivion 1, which means that they apply a leech on hit. And that deals void damage to the person that they hit, as well as heals them over time. They have Void Resist, like I was talking about before. They take less damage from void damage. A percentage of all the damage that they deal is dealt as void damage, and they apply a building thing called Paranoia when they're hit, and at 4 stacks that deals void damage, and it seems to be in an AoE area. You can see in this clip here that this is the mutated tier 1. As you go up the mutation tiers, you'll see in the footage that there's a scoreboard at the top of my screen, which has a multiplier next to it. I'll try my best to explain how that works. There's a little information in the patch notes, but it's not quite as informative as it might otherwise be. Basically, you get a base score for killing everything. You get some score for killing regular mobs, you get more for killing named, you get a lot for killing bosses, for finishing the dungeon, you get score for all that type of thing. And if you hover over, you'll see the list of things that give a multiplier. Now that doesn't mean it's like if you complete this, you get the points. If you don't get the points. If you complete it, you get the multiplier. So if you finish the dungeon in under 40 minutes, you get a ×2 multiplier on your score. If you kill enough trash, you get a ×3. Kill enough mini bosses, a ×4, and they all stack. However, if you full team wipe, you lose one of those multipliers. If too many people die, you lose another one of those multipliers. And it's not as if when you've lost the multiplier, your score, that's the effect that it has on your score. The more people die, the more score is reduced from your end total. So don't think, oh, well, we've died more than 3 times, we've lost the multiplier, so we can die as much as we want now. The more you die, the more score you lose. It just means that scoreboard just means that the multiplier to affect your end score has gone. If you want to increase from dungeon mutation level 1 to dungeon mutation level 2, then you need to get a score of, I think it was 20,000 when we got to the end of our dungeon, which we fell well short of, although we did have a lot of issues with players leaving in the middle of our expedition. My excuse for my horrendous gameplay is that I'm playing on 300 ping and it was very difficult, but you know, I'd have some other excuse if I had good ping, so take that with a grain of salt. It seems pretty clear to me that gem swapping is going to become a thing. If it's a void week in the rotation, then you are going to want to have all gems which are reducing the void damage that you take, as well as, if you can eventually, get the new armor attributes, which are elemental conditioning. So for instance, flame conditioning, which after being hit with fire damage, you get 4% fire absorption for 5 seconds. Each piece of armor with this perk increases the potency of this effect. So that means that you would read, if each armor piece had 4% on it, if you had 2, it would have 8%. But what that perk means is that they get more potent as you stack them up. So instead of having 8, it might have 10, 12, and the more you stack up, the more potent it's going to get. You get the craft mods to make that resistance gear from rewards when you finish a mutated dungeon. So as you do more mutated dungeons, you'll be able to craft more specific gear with that conditioning, and I think that's the thing that we're really going to want to stack, as well as specific gems for each week, to be able to cop all the damage that's going out. Because let me just tell you, I was pretty surprised with how difficult our dungeon mutation level 1 was. Now, admittedly, I'm not doing this in a full company group. We were all pugs, all pulled together. I don't know if those guys were level 12 on live or whether they were, you know, full 590 expertise people. It could have been anyone. And as I say, I was playing with 300 ping, so it was probably more difficult than you will find it in your average, you know, company run of a dungeon. But I thought, you know, level 1's going to be a walk in the park and it'll ramp up from there. Wasn't the case. It was quite difficult. I swapped out void reduction damage per gems in all of my gear slots, and I still died a fair bit. Or a lot. Or heaps. Shut up, alright? The higher up in dungeon mutation levels that you go, the more rewards that you get. Also, the better you perform, the more rewards that you get. As you go up in dungeon mutation levels, there's a greater option of items that can drop. It's not just that the one thing is going to drop at a higher gear score for you. There is a greater array on the loot table. You get umbral shards at the end of the expedition, and only at the end if you successfully complete it. And it is a direct reflection of the difficulty level of the mutation, as well as your overall score when you get to the end. So if you do a 10 with a really good score, you'll get heaps. If you do a 1 with a really good score, you'll get obviously a lot less than 10, but you'll get heaps more than if you do a 1 with a really bad score. It scales up on both of those sliding scales. Umbral shards are used on any 600, has to be at least 600 gear score item. You just right click the gear and click upgrade, and you can apply an amount of umbral shards. Applying umbral shards increases the gear's gear score of that specific piece of gear. So if you put it on the playtester ice gauntlet, for instance, when I put my 21 shards on there, it went from gear score 600 to gear score 606, but that's going to scale logarithmically up. There you go, that's a maths term for you. I'm getting better. So by the end, to get from 624 to 625 is going to require an absolute load of shards. You can only apply umbral shards to gear that is 600 or higher. If your expertise in that slot is 600 and you make a level 600 item go to level 606, then your expertise will also bump up to 606. However, if you have a level 600 item that you bought from the trading post and your expertise is level 590, and you apply umbral shards to the trading post piece of gear, its gear score will go up, but the expertise of that slot will stay exactly the same. So you have to get from 590, if you're already maxed the regular way, up to 600 by gypsum or random drops from expeditions, corrupted portals, yada, yada, yada. And then when you get to 600, you will stop being able to upgrade in that regular way. You can't apply gypsum to go from 600 to 602. What you do is you apply umbral shards to increase in that regard. So my strong advice would be to use your umbral shards My strong advice would be to use your umbral shards on items in slots that are already at 600 expertise, so you're getting both the gear score bump and the expertise bump at the same time. However, if you get a really good bit of gear and you want that to be able to help push your dungeon mutations harder, faster, higher, stronger, yes, apparently I'm ad-libbing Daft Punk now, inadvertently, then you might spend them in the hopes that you'll make more back. But we can see that if you manage to perfect a level 10 mutated expedition, then you'll get a maximum of 6,000 umbral shards. So it does scale up quite quickly. You know, it seems to be it's gone up by more than 1,000%, from 40 to 600, from 1 to 10. Let's have a look at 5, how many you can get. You get 200. So from 5 to 10, it's still scaling up very quickly. You'll see that you always have a chance to get the same dungeon. I'm never going to get out of the habit. It's a chance to get the same expedition rewards, but from level 1, where there's 3 difficulty items in addition, to level 10, where there's 30, which is a huge amount more, and these are obviously going to drop at your relevant expertise level. Hopefully that has explained the dungeon mutation system to you a bit more clearly than the patch notes did. I was really struggling to understand from the patch notes, so actually being able to see it and experiencing it, it's really not that complicated. The complicated things to understand is the mutated tuning orbs that you need to have, the codex that you need to have, and then once you got your head around that, it's just going to be a matter of playing and learning what the different changes to the mob types do. It seems I didn't speak for long enough to cover the whole of our expedition experience. There's quite a lot of footage that I've left cut out, but I'll put the end here so you can see what happens when you finish the expedition and the victory screen pops up. You get an understanding about how that scoreboard is working a little bit better. That brings us to the end of our full mutation expedition explanation, which is quite a lot of long words strung together. If you've made it to the end, then thank you very much. Leave a comment down below about your thoughts. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Thank you very much for watching. I love you, and remember,